Coming to you live from Hell's Kitchen, it's the Movie Change Up Podcast Disney Plus Weekly Review. Where each week, me, Joe Fricke, and my co-host, Tristan Mayer, we break down this week in Disney Plus. If you got Disney Plus and, you're waiting for the next Marvel show to come out, there's no Marvel, no Star Wars right now, and you're like, what should I be watching? What should I avoid? That's what we're here for. There was some content that I don't think we got to this week because I think Disney Plus isn't very good at promoting some of their smaller stuff, which we should probably be more attentive to, and I'm going to definitely work on that. But yeah, that's what we're here for. We're here to tell you what you should and should not watch on Disney Plus. So Tristan, what was your thought on Disney Plus this week? Not a lot of big drops, a little bit of sprinkling of news.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you mentioned, randomly I'll drop something and it'll be like, where did that come from? And I feel like we definitely sometimes catch us, sometimes we don't, but this is one of those weeks you say we're going to recommend what you maybe should watch, what you maybe should avoid, and I think we have a couple of things maybe, or at least one thing I feel like you should be avoiding this week, but I'll try to keep some positivity in there, and we have some good news to talk about too, so it'll be a fun conversation, but I'm blaming Joe for this movie this week. It's going to be on my list of grievances against Joe. It's going to be cheaper than a dozen. Many grievances, but here's one.
All right, so let's kick off with the first topic here. We had a trailer drop this week, and that is for the MCU show, Miss Marvel. It's about Kamala Khan, who kind of discovers these powers that maybe come from the cosmos, because she, starts to use them, and she's like, oh, cosmic, because, the great writing of the MCU. And it definitely has the, kid feel, it almost reminded me a bit of the Spider-Man, the recent Spider-Man trailers and the recent Spider-Man movies with, them talking and the text bubbles coming up. I'm curious to see if that's a trailer-only thing or if that's something that's going to be in the show. Considering it was only really in that first scene, I'm thinking it's probably going to be a trailer-only thing, but we shall see. Tristan, what were kind of some of your thoughts on this trailer?
Yeah, for me, this feels kind of like what I expected from these Disney Plus shows, where it's very much like, here's a Disney Channel original show with a bit of a bigger budget, maybe some better effects, a couple of better actors, and yeah, this feels to me like it's going for a younger demographic than a lot of the Marvel shows, all of the Marvel shows have gone for so far, and I think that's good. We're going to have Moon Knight in a couple of weeks, and that feels like it's going for a much older demographic, and I kind of like that these shows can have that wider range and be like, okay, here's one that pretty much appeals to kids. Here's one that pretty much appeals to adults. I don't necessarily have to feel the need to appeal to every single person with these shows. I think that can provide for some good stuff, and I'm looking forward to the show because I do like Ms. Marvel. I think it's interesting that I think she's the most recent comic book character to make her way into a leading role in the MCU. She just started in 2013, so she's a pretty recent character. A lot of the ones they use are like old school classics, like Silver Age characters, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they can adapt someone who is so recent and only has a handful of storylines to go off of. So it'll be interesting to see what they draw from, what they don't. I know the poster they put out is literally an exact copy of one of the comic book covers from one of her early runs. So I wonder if that's going to be one they draw from a lot. But I'm interested to see how they pull this off because they do capture that kind of nerdy side of the character where she's obsessed with the Avengers and she's kind of, an Avengers nerd. And that's definitely part of the character. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the show because we haven't really gotten to see how the existence of superheroes and the existence of all of these larger-than-life characters have affected the normal life of everyday people in a way. So we're going to be able to see the fan culture around the Avengers, how people react to, what are the conversations of the average teen in a world where Thor exists, what is that like to grow up in high school when that you just saw Thanos snap away half the universe, and I wonder if I'll get into some of that, and I get into her religion a bit too. I think that'll be interesting, how do you believe in a religion when Thor is real in your world, when there's a Loki that walks around, and I think that would at least a little bit change your perspective on some of your beliefs, and I'm curious if they'll get into that at all, or if that'll just be kind of a little bit of a flavor on top. I'm curious how much your beliefs are going to play in. I'm not someone to, I'm just a white dude. What do I know about representation? But I've seen both sides of the argument kind of fighting over this trailer, whether or not this is good or bad or not, just neutral representation. And it'll be I think you can't really judge that kind of stuff until you see the actual show play out. Like, how do you judge from a trailer how well they're portraying her religion or her beliefs or her ethnicity, you know?
Yeah.
So that'll be something to watch. And I'm also, last thing about this, very curious about her powers. The powers are like way different
Yeah.
than they were in the comics. I knew they would change them. That was kind of reported on for a while by a lot of people that it was going to be these kind of technology based magic type powers rather than the stretchy powers she has, like Mr. Fantastic kind of body morphing powers in the comics. And I think that adds thematically to her character in a way because she has the ability to morph her body. She can change the way she looks. She can look like that popular, generic white girl that she's arguing with in the trailer, the kind of bully. She can look like the idealized version of whatever women should look like in society, but she chooses to look like herself. And I think that is a really important element of the character that seems to be lost with these new powers.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's something they're gonna work in there one way or another, because they still worked in like a big elongated fist and like reaching out and touching stuff. You know, it's similar powers in the way they work, but they look totally different, and the functioning is different. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to adapt. We talked about before how I think in a text about how Marvel has the ability to pretty much do anything they want with a lot of their characters because they don't have as much of a following, as much of like a something like Batman, where it's like you know what a Batman is generally going to be like, so you kind of have to do that. But Ms. Marvel, you can do whatever you want, really. And I wonder, this is probably the biggest change they've made to a character's power specifically in any of these characters. So I'm curious to see if that is stretching it a bit too far, no pun intended, to change of these characters. If that's going to probably be like, okay, you changed it, but maybe a little bit too much.
Yeah, I get that, and I think part of it is that it feels that allows them to change things is because it's like a B and C level characters. Like you even look at Suicide Squad and some of the like lower tier characters that they even put on Peacemaker, they just completely changed because no one cares about those characters. And I feel like they kind of gave her Green Lantern's powers, and like the general reaction from fans is like, that's weird, you know, I don't know how I feel about that. And there's a small bit of uproar, but overall people are just more interested to see what they do. But if you were to take Green Lantern and be like, oh, here's Green Lantern, he has a ring that allows him to stretch his body at will, people would be like, what the fuck, that's not even Green Lantern, like, why did you make this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because they did capture the whole personality of the character. Like she definitely comes off exactly like the character I've read, and exactly like the character. If you played the Avengers video game, you know her really well. You like her opening scene in Matches. She goes to like an Avengers fan meeting, you know, and she's kind of like an Avengers fangirl in that game. So I think they captured the personality type of the character, and I'm curious if that's enough to get past the drastically different powers.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to touch on as far as like the representation, again, I'm just like a straight white guy, so what do I know? But I wonder, like to me, part of representation is like we've had, you know, 75 years of movies and TV shows of like straight white guys just like existing as straight white guys, and their characters not being about them being straight white guys. They just existed that way. So like I feel like you can have teenage Muslim girl just existing as a teenage Muslim girl, and the story doesn't have to be about her existing as a teenage Muslim girl. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's definitely positivity in that kind of representation too, where it's like not every movie starring a Muslim or a Middle Eastern actress. I'm not sure what her religion is or anything, but not every movie starring like a person of color needs to be like about their race, you know? And I think we see that a lot in some movies where it's like, oh, if a black director's directing it, then you think, oh, it has to be about race now. But like, I don't think that is the case, you know? Like, you can just have that be the character, you know, and be an element of the character, but not like the central part of the plot.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else you got to say about this trailer?
I'm curious what our Marvel crossover is going to be for this. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of like references and things like that. She's wearing an Avengers shirt. I would not at all be surprised to see Brie Larson show up.
Yeah, Brie Larson.
Captain Marvel have a pretty direct connection in the comics, and she's going to be in the Marvels too with her. So they're going to have a literal on-screen crossover.
Yeah, I think Brie Larson has posted a bit about like when the trailer dropped. I think she posted about it on Instagram or something, and like something on Twitter. I don't remember, but I know she's posted about it. So I'm, I can't the what is it, Monica Rambeau, or what's the character's name that was in WandaVision?
I believe it was Monica Rambeau.
I think she's gonna show up midway through the first, or like midway through the season, and I think kind of maybe not post credit, but I think final episode Brie Larson shows up.
Yeah, because this is our first time we're getting a character where we know for a fact she's going to be not just appearing in another movie, but like one of the lead characters of an upcoming movie. So I think we're definitely going to get some setup here. And I'm curious if, because there's also the possibility that the Marvels would come out earlier than we expected it to come out. I think that might end up happening. So it would be interesting to see if that works out where this show ends up ending like right in time for the Marvels to come out.
Yeah. Definitely. Anything else you want to say before we move on to the Proud Family, Louder and Prouder? And he cut out, so I am just going to move on to the Proud Family, Louder and Prouder. This was, I believe, episode 5 in the reboot, and essentially, this episode was called Snackland, and Oscar Proud, the father of the family, opened up a basically theme park based all around his snacks, and the theme park kind of sucks. It's not good, quality's crap, and the kind of B plot to this episode is Penny Proud's singing voice changes because she has a singing group with all of her friends, and her singing group changes, and now she sounds like Tone Loc. I believe they actually brought in Tone Loc to voice her singing voice, and they make fun of her for it, and she's essentially kicked out of the group, and they were supposed to perform at Snackland, and she's all sad and depressed, and then she meets the guest star of the week, Lizzo, playing herself, who is being paid a whopping $50 to perform at Snackland. Or, well, she thought she was being paid $500, but Oscar says that was a typo. She's only getting paid $50, and then her check bounces, so ultimately she makes nothing. But she's like, hey, Penny, just be yourself. I'm myself, you should be yourself, go out there. And Lizzo, it's time for Lizzo to go out on stage and perform, and she's like, hey, I'm not going to perform, I'm not getting paid. Who is going to perform? And she introduces Penny's singing group, and then says, and their lead singer, Penny Proud. Penny Proud comes out, raps like Tone Loc. Pretty decent, okay song for what this show is. And it's all about learning to be yourself. And honestly, I feel like it's the last time we're going to cover the Proud Family in depth on this show, just because every review is the same. Hey, did you watch the original series? Did you like it? You'll like this. It's perfect continuation. I feel like it's the exact same quality as the original series, just with updated animation. That's really all I have to say about this. It's a good, solid episode. It's not like my favorite show in the world, but I feel like it's a good show for kids to watch, and parents won't want to beat their heads against the wall while they watch it.
I definitely think it's when we come back in and we have interesting episodes to talk about, because last week I thought it was a really good episode, a good conversation to have, and then this week it was very much a kid episode. And I appreciate that it can be like, oh, here's the one that's kind of an important episode with an important meaning, and then we're going to have one that's just
Be
a
yourself.
Lizzo cameo for a whole episode.
Yeah.
And they didn't even address the fact that Oscar was possessed by this like random alien monster thing in the last episode. He was just all of a sudden there running a theme park. He had like an action park kind of theme park. I thought that was kind of a fun premise, but I also thought it was really strange that they had the Lizzo cover, but they had to censor like so many.
They couldn't
words.
even say the title. So me and my girlfriend were watching it, and we were like, when you can't even say the title of the song in the episode, pick a different song.
I know, I was like, this is kind of strange. And then like if you watch the subtitles the subtitles like don't even match like because they changed the words in the subtitles to be like safe for work language, but then the language of the song is just kind of like censored silence, So it's a really weird mix of things. But I mean, I appreciate a celebrity cameo in my children's cartoons, so it was kind of fun to see it, I guess. But yeah, definitely a kid-oriented episode for this week.
Yep. All right. Anything else you really got to say? Is kind of just a basic episode. I don't think.
I'm looking forward to next week. We'll see if it's going to be like what direction I go in. Is it going to be the goofy kid episode, or is it going to be another like heartfelt episode with the more of a deeper meaning? But
yeah, I'm definitely going to keep watching it. If I see an episode worth bringing up or worth talking about, we'll definitely talk about it on here. But now with Moon Knight starting up soon, I just don't see the point in trying to cover every single episode of the Proud Family.
Did your voice drastically change at puberty, Joe? Did you get a super deep voice?
Did I sound like rapper Tone Loc at puberty? No, I did not. Did you?
I went through a pretty intense voice change.
No.
Not that intense, but a much lower octave than it was when I was in the middle school.
Ah, okay, yeah, my voice just kind of stayed the same. All right, so the next topic we have is the Defender Saga has officially moved to Disney Plus, and we talked about last week, like, oh, what tab are they going to put it under? What are they going to call it? And I guess they ultimately settled on the Defender Saga, which they stuck under the Marvel tab on Disney Plus, and now there's parental controls. There's a pin you can set it up. So I'm curious if that can lead to more adult content on Disney Plus. Maybe we hear where if I know How I Met Your Father, starring Hilary Duff, kind of got a second season, but maybe if that falls apart, maybe there is a chance we do get the Lizzie McGuire reboot back on Disney Plus, and maybe they decide, hey, you know what, we can put this more adult-oriented show. Because honestly, I still don't understand what their thought process was on kids having any interest in a show about a 30-year-old woman returning home to live with her parents after her fiance dumping her and losing her job. Because that's stuff that kids can relate to. But Tristan, what are your thoughts on the whole thing, from Defenders now on Disney Plus to the whole parental control system and
Yeah, I definitely think the parental control system and the adding of these mature content shows is the more interesting conversation. Because of course, the Defenders is all on there, the whole saga is on there, but I think it's definitely curious to see how this does, and I imagine it's kind of like a testing of the waters. Do people like this? Do people actually watch this? What's the metric when they go in there and break down the numbers? Like how many people are saying adult profile? How many people are saying teen? How many people are saying kid? Is there a demographic there for adult content, or is there not? And I think that's going to be the larger question that they ask here. And yeah, the Hillary Duff show would be interesting. I think generally a lot more backlog content is going to be important for Disney Plus, because all these other platforms have like very extensive acquired movies from other studios and other kind of like backlog movies that will help their longevity is streaming platforms. And I think if Disney is only adding new content, and the content is not exactly top tier all the time. We're going to talk about a movie in a second that, like, I'm not paying for Disney Plus so I can get movies like this. I would hope there's a bit more output in the future than just this, and I think the opening of the gates to this mature stuff is going to help that.
yeah,
But I
definitely.
am curious about Defenders. I haven't seen all of this. I've seen a handful of the shows, but I haven't seen all of them, so this is probably an excuse for me to watch what I haven't seen. I saw the first season of Daredevil. I saw a couple episodes of season 2 of Daredevil. I saw all of Jessica Jones, and I've seen like a handful of episodes here and there of other things. I've seen none of the Punisher. I've seen none of Iron Fist. I haven't seen the Defenders. Those are the ones that I kind of want to get, especially Punisher. I've heard really, really good things about the Punisher, and I liked him in a couple episodes I saw of Daredevil.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to fill that one in for sure.
Yeah, I've seen everything, I think, except for if there's 2 seasons of The Punisher. I never saw the second season, and I never saw any of Iron Fist, but I've seen everything else. And it's one of those things that starts off great, and everyone was hyped about it, and each season of everything is worse than the season before. Like, if you were to just rank the seasons in release order, everything just gets progressively worse.
Yeah, I was not very very into most of these. I thought Jessica Jones was a great watch. That was probably my favorite, especially that first season. I thought was really compelling and really dramatic, and kind of pushed the boundaries for, because Netflix always claimed, oh, we're going to be like the darker, grittier take on superheroes, and then I thought that was the one that actually was a bit darker and a bit grittier. And I definitely recommend the first season of Jessica Jones and the first season of Daredevil. Like, those are the ones that I saw and liked a lot. And then after that, I just really, really lost interest pretty quick on the run of shows there. But
Yep.
Agents of Shield, I did not watch much of either. That's on Disney Plus as well. We always talk about the Defender Saga, but I want to mention Agents of Shield. That has a huge, like, fan following. They were on the verge of cancellation plenty of times, and then the fan movement came on and said, "Oh, renew Agents of Shield," and they got renewed a couple of times. So they have their cult following. Definitely a show of highs and lows. I saw the first season of that, and talk about like a roller coaster of quality. But it could be a fun binge.
Yep. All right. Anything else you got to say about the whole thing?
No, I'm curious if you guys out there have watched them all, what you recommend that I watch, because I have seen only maybe a quarter of these shows. So if you're a huge fanboy of these shows and you want to tell me What are the good ones that I should definitely check out first? Is it worth watching them in release order, or can I just kind of like bounce around and pick out the ones that I like?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that I have.
I'd answer those questions if it hadn't been like 3 years since I watched any of the content. I will say Luke Cage is really good if you haven't watched that. I did enjoy Luke Cage. People
I'll
say,
check
"Oh,
that one out.
the first half is way better than the second half," but I like both halves equally.
That'll be a priority on the list.
All right, and I think that brings us to our next topic, which is probably just a short discussion, and that is Christopher Lloyd is going to be a part of season 3 of The Mandalorian. I'm curious because of the news release. Does it have to do with his name and being a? I mean, he's not. I mean, he hasn't done. He was a nobody, but he's not a guy that's like consistently working. It's not like Tom Hanks is joining season 3 of The Mandalorian. But I think just the legacy of Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and some of his other work, that he has remained just like this big name in pop culture. So I'm curious if the news releasing has more to do with his name or if it's the size of the role and he's actually going to be a prominent part of uh, season 3. What are your thoughts, Tristan?
Yeah, I'm curious. Mandalorian season 3 has been something that we haven't necessarily talked a lot about yet because it's always on the back burner. It feels like something that's coming in this far future land. But we're finally getting casting news and we're finally getting stuff like this, so it's feeling real, and we've had. Look, I'm gonna throw this out there. I think Back to the Future is probably the best movie ever made. I think it's like literally a perfect movie,
Hey.
and Christopher Lloyd is a major reason for that. So anything you add Christopher Lloyd to, I'm like, okay, perfect. I'm down for that. You just made it better than it was before. So, Mandalorian season 3, I'm in. I'm all in.
Yeah.
I hope he has a couple episodes. I'm sure he's gonna be like a bartender, something like that. Not exactly well, he could do action. I mean, nobody he had action sequences. So you could pull out a surprise and make him like fight stormtroopers or whatever. He could have some Star Wars action.
Yeah, so Back to the Future, it's not number 1 for me, but it is in my top 5, so I'm not going to argue you too much on it being the greatest movie ever made because I love it a lot. One of the things that I forgot, it's kind of in the leak territory, but not really, is one of the big heavy rumors is there was one of the prominent figures in season 3 was a Mandalorian leader who's kind of this crusty old grumpy man. And a lot of people are starting to now speculate what if that character is going to be played by Christopher Lloyd, which I would rather enjoy a lot of him as like this old kind of Mandalorian. And a lot of people, like, I 100% would not be surprised. He's a one-off episode as a bartender. Like, if that's what happened, I will not be shocked at all. But I would love for his character to be like this kind of friendly guy at first that Din sees as maybe like a mentor or someone to look up to or someone to teach him, and then at some point he has a menacing villain turn because I think, as someone who's played Judge Doom and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I think he could have a great villain turn, especially because no one really expects it. Everyone I see a lot of people like, oh, I hope he plays like some quirky scientist or he's probably just playing like this lovable bartender. To have him show up and be this old Mandalorian guy who just is like, oh, like this is the guy who's going to train Din and be the mentor to Din, and then just have him be a villain turn, and maybe he tries to take the Darksaber from Din, I think could be a great moment in The Mandalorian, and maybe an all-time great Star Wars moment if it's, done well.
I like that a lot. I think it'd be a great twist where he's the villain because, of course, everyone loves Christopher Lloyd. They're expecting him to be a heroic role, like you said, so it would be fun to see that twist, and I would love to see Christopher Lloyd play that villainous role. In Nobody, he was not exactly a good guy, but he had a similar role where he was kind of like an advisor type of character, and then he had this violent turn in the movie. So I think it'll be fun to see him kind of play around with that. And like Werner Herzog was in the first season, and that's kind of like you add this huge Hollywood legacy to your show with Werner Herzog, and he's not a lead character, but he had like a handful of episodes, handful of scenes, and I could see Christopher Lloyd having a similar level of presence in season 3, where he's like the big Hollywood legacy that kind of elevates the project a bit, but he's not necessarily like the main villain or ultimately one of the main characters. He has a pivotal point in the plot, but not necessarily the lead. But who knows? I mean, we're all just guessing out of literally nothing. So I could see it going either direction. The reality is Christopher Lloyd is a little old, so I don't think he's going to be having hugely important plot points or anything like that.
The thing is,
but I definitely
I was gonna say if he's a Mandalorian, you can have him talk, standing around talking with Din, and then it's time for battle. He puts that helmet on, and then you can put anyone in that suit to fight our main character.
That's true. Because to Christopher Lloyd doing backflips in the Mandalorian costume, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And like to further on your point about he doesn't need a big role to be pivotal. Bill Burr has only been in like 2 or 3 episodes of the 16, and he probably has one of my favorite moments in the show where he's when they are invading that Imperial base and he's talking to that Imperial, and Bill Burr can't take it anymore and he just shoots him. And that whole speech and everything was probably one of my all-time favorite moments in the show. So I think Christopher Lloyd can do the same, where maybe he's in 1 or 2 episodes this season, but it's an important moment, an important episode.
I would be happy with that. I'm really looking forward to it. I am a big fan of Christopher Lloyd, even bigger fan of Christopher Lloyd than I am of Mandalorian. So
Yeah.
it'll be a nice little injection of excitement when we get to that season. I wonder. It's so many months away. It'd be very possible to like completely forget that he's in it until I watch it at this point. Like unless he's in the trailer and the marketing and that kind of stuff, I could be like, oh right, Christopher Lloyd is in this.
Yep. All right, and that brings us to our final topic, which is probably a movie that's going to top both of our year-end list as far as worst movies of the year. And that is Cheaper by the Dozen. It's the, I believe, 3rd iteration. There was one in the 50s, one in the early 2000s, directed by Sean Levy of all people. Which we watched that one last night as well, and it's kind of nice to compare them. But yeah, this one, Cheaper by the Dozen. It's technically Yours, Mine, and Ours, another film that's basically the same thing, which don't know why they didn't just call it that. Doesn't really matter. Don't really care. Stars Zach Braff and Gabrielle Union with a slew of kids that may or may not become famous one day. One of them I know will never become famous because he couldn't act his way out of a paper bag. Yeah, the movie is horrible. It's, this mixed race family, which isn't why it's horrible. Don't get that impression. Don't know why I went from one topic like that to the other. But mixed race family coming together, basically Yours, Mine, and Ours. The dad is a chef, and he came up with this sauce that's apparently sweet when you want it to be sweet, hot when you want it to be hot, and savory when you want it to be savory. And then he's basically trying to start this, diner empire, essentially, breakfast diner empire. Meets up with these 2 women. They try taking over his business, essentially. And a lot of plot holes and plot flaws and things that don't really make sense. Ultimately, they bring in this cousin for no reason. That's like a sequel thing. It's like they had the script for the sequel, and then there's like, oh no, this first movie sucks. We're not going to be able to make the sequel. Just put that plot point in the first one. It was not good. I'm going to have PTSD flashbacks anytime I hear the word dozen. My eyes just going to start twitching. I would say avoid this movie at all costs. If you have kids and they're like begging you, like, Mommy, Daddy, we want to watch Cheaper by the Dozen. We want to watch Cheaper by the Dozen. Burn your TV to the ground. Do not let this movie play in your house. Unplug your TV and tell the kids it just don't work anymore. And then
Give the kids in for adoption, I say.
You don't honestly, you don't need those kids anymore. It's just anything you can do to avoid watching this movie, do it.
Yeah, this was a rough one. Not a good movie here. Like you said, it feels like a lot of stuff is thrown in for no reason, and that cousin plot is the most no reason. They have random cousin named like Seth or something.
The worst actor I've ever seen in a movie. There were times where like he would talk and it literally reminded me of The Room.
Yeah, he definitely gave me the most unintentional laughs of the movie, like when he tried to make serious or argue with his adopted his like pseudo family, because he's kind of not even like he just kind of lives there, and like it would be so funny when he'd try and say something serious and he'd be like, I was happy with my bros. And I was like, oh my god.
And there was a moment.
Who wrote this?
So they go and they like it's if you watch the first, or not the first one, but the one in the 2000s where Mark, he runs away and they all chase after him. So this same thing happens where they accuse him of stealing because he did steal. He just gave the money back and they didn't see that part. And so he gets all mad that they caught him stealing. He runs away to his home and he runs out onto the front porch. We never see the inside of the house where he's at all. And they're like, oh, we want you to live with us. You're part of the family. He opens the door, looks back inside to people we've never seen, never see the inside, and he's like, goodbye, guys, and then closes the door. I'm like, why do we need that? Who was he talking to? He could have just left and no one would have questioned why he didn't say outside. There was another part. So this movie does touch on racism, which I feel like is something it could have delved deeper into, because it was this weird thing where they go and they touch on it and then they'd ease back. And they go and they touch on it and they ease back. And so essentially they feel like their business, this diner empire, is going to take off. Haven't really received much money from it, but they have faith it's going to take off. So before waiting like maybe a year and seeing if they accumulate a bunch of money, they're like, screw it. They go and buy a mansion for some reason. And this community of this, basically development area with a bunch of mansions, some for some reason or another has a community pool. When you know for a fact they'd all have their, with houses that accommodate a dozen people, they'd all have their own pool. Nope, screw it. There's a community pool for some reason. And they face racism there. And it's just, honestly, so much of the movie is from the adult's perspective, but the humor is definitely aimed at kids that I question who is this movie for. Honestly, I think there was a good movie, or like a decent movie somewhere in here. You start the movie off with his sauce empire is taking off, because that was part of it, is he wanted to sell his sauce in stores. Of maybe he signs a deal with, like, name a store. You could make up a fictional grocery store if you wanted to. Like, hey, all of my sauces are now going to be sold in whatever store. We just got a big deal for a bunch of money. We're moving. And, like, that's the opening scene. Instead of having the dumb dance-off and any of the scenes in the first 20 minutes that do not matter. And then the whole movie is them, like, facing racism in, like, their rich white privilege school. And a lot of it's from the kid's perspective, which the 2003 version with Tom Welling and Hilary Duff and Steve Martin was, where this movie for some reason was from the adult's perspective, and no kids care to see a board meeting about sauce. Like, why are we doing this, and like talking about whether products are going to be bought in bulk or from local farmers. Like, kids don't care about this. It reminded me of the Phantom Menace, where how this movie's supposedly for kids, but we're talking about trade negotiations and blockades. And who cares? But yeah, I feel like if the movie was more, you just start the movie at the time of they're moving to the rich house, and then it's from the kids' perspective, and them at school, and them getting bullied, and dealing with that, it would have been better. But because it couldn't have been much worse.
Or what this movie is for. Like you said, I don't know what the audience is here. The kids are pure props. Like, they don't really they have arcs, I guess, but like they're not the focus of the story. And the focus instead is like the most unrelatable people you could possibly imagine. Like, I don't understand. We're coming off of like a huge economic downturn, a crisis for 2 years, 2 years of crisis, and now we're getting this story about these people who just have like a sauce empire, and it's so good, and they make so much money, and they live in this mansion. And I was like, what is the audience for this? Who is watching this? Who wants this? And you look up the movie, and there's like 5 writing credits, so clearly this went through like a lot of faces and different ideas. And it looks to me like one of those movies that was written like 10 years ago, sitting on a shelf, and then Disney was like, what IP can we bring back? And they said, oh, what about Cheap Brother Dozen? And they went and they found some random script about a guy who had a sauce empire and moved to a mansion, and they were like, what if he had a dozen kids?
Well, he only had 10 kids, because in this version the parents count as part of the dozen.
Yeah, that's not even Cheap Brother Dozen. Like, it's not even the premise of Cheap Brother Dozen. You mentioned that it's like a handful of other movies that are not Cheap Brother Dozen. So it's like this was, I don't know if this was even like written to be Cheap Brother Dozen script.
And the worst part of the movie was, so this movie deals a lot with because both parents are divorced, and they both have like partners that are in the movie quite a bit, and the mom coming around and babysitting the kids is weird, and that would never happen in real life. But like the dad, who's a professional football player, and he's black, and he doesn't feel that Zach Braff can like raise his black kids, which I can understand that point, whatever. But then, they get into an argument about it, and Zach Braff's trying to defend himself, and then they find out that the white cousin Seth has run away, and they find him, and like, because they find him, the dad's like, "Oh, I guess I trust you to raise my black kids." But I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, I don't think you ever questioned that he was like a bad guy or like a bad dad. You just were like, my kids are gonna go through experiences that you can't relate with, and that's still not resolved. Like,
Yeah, and it's not even present in the narrative. Like when that scene came up, I was like, where did this come from? Because there was never a conversation about like race between the kids. Really, like there was the one kid who got a little bit bullied because of his like Middle Eastern race, but it's not even. It wasn't even like the. It wasn't even about being black, And I wish like he said they kind of hinted about racial commentary, and I think it's in a very frustrating way. I love social commentary in a movie. If you've seen my movie Change Up Pitches, I'm always trying to throw in
yeah,
commentary to these random movies that maybe don't even need it. But this felt like one of the ones like that, where it was like, and it felt like in a very Disney way too. Like you
yeah,
said, it kind of comes up and kind of lightly taps on it. It's like, oh, racism exists, Remember racism? And then just never really does anything with it
yeah.
at all. And it feels like a big problem with a lot of these big studio productions that want to be socially aware but don't actually want to do anything or say anything. So it's like we're just going to kind of acknowledge the problem and not
Yeah.
actually like offer any solutions or perspective or anything like that. We're just going to kind of like say that racism is bad.
Yeah, and like one of the things too is like they move into the neighborhood, and one of like the neighborhood watch guys or whatever he is shows up, and he's like reminds them that there's a noise ordinance, and like Gabrielle Union was like, "Oh, are you just saying it because it's me?" And like I was like, as I was watching it, I'm like trying to say, are they trying to say like, oh, he's only saying it to him because she's black, or it's like this mixed race family, but also at the end of the day, it's a family of 12 people. And it's most of them kids. So I think saying like, hey, there's a noise ordinance here after 10 o'clock, it's not like an insane thing to do. Like maybe wait until they violate the noise ordinance to remind them, but also like this guy who's the security guard there sees a family of 10 kids roll up out of this truck being loud, being obnoxious. I don't think it's crazy to be like, hey, just so you know, noise ordinance after 10.
I mean, yeah, I want to mention the director, Gail Lerner, because she does have a lot. This was her first movie, and at first I was like, well, why do they give it to this random person who's never made a movie before? But then you look her up, and she is a very experienced producer. She worked extensively on Blackish,
Mm-hmm.
so I think her experience in that show definitely informed here. And I think I want to give her some credit because I imagine she like Blackish does a lot of commentary and a lot of like, oh, it's a family show and kid oriented in a way, but it also can work in racial commentary. So I want to imagine that her heart was in the right place when she was trying to do this well.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you're working in a studio system like this, I don't know how much you can really do. And
Yeah.
it looks like such a studio movie. The lighting is like so bad. It
Mm.
looks like all so overlit. There's like not a single shadow. There's not no dynamic lighting to any of this. It's like a Lifetime movie set. It's like a model home. You know, everything is so light and so bright,
Yeah.
and it's like a movie made in a factory somewhere that just all of a sudden popped up out of nowhere. You're like Zach Braff, like materializing out of the ether to star in this random movie on Disney Plus, and I'm like, where did this really even come from? And I'd be curious to see if Gail Lerner does anything after this, and if she's able to go more cinematic with it. But yeah, right now it definitely. When I look her up and I see she worked on a bunch of TV shows, I feel like that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Will and Grace and things like that. She was the executive producer on a lot of TV shows, and this feels like a TV show. It's like, oh, we're gonna throw in the episode with the cousin. Then there's gonna be an episode where the family moves to a mansion and realizes, hey, maybe this life is not for us. We got to go back
Mhm.
to our normal life. And then there'd be an episode like it feels like 3 or 4 like storyline
Yeah.
episodes thrown into like a movie, and
Yeah, I was
not
about to
all of
say.
them really fit together and doesn't look that good. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think this is a good one.
I was about to say, would this have been better if it were a TV show? And because this movie had no overarching plot, it just had like 10 subplots. If each of the subplot was an episode, would it have been? Do you think this show would have been better than the movie we got?
I think it would have been a bit better, especially because we could have spent more time with the kids and develop them a bit more, because as of now, like you have a woman in a wheelchair, like a child in a wheelchair, and that's great representation, but she also just feels kind of like this tokenized random. They're like, oh, just throw a wheelchair person in.
Yeah.
It's like, you didn't get a chance to really look at any of these kid characters at all.
Yeah.
So it just in a way felt like checking off boxes of like archetypes to throw in. So it would have been nice to be able to spend some more time with the kids. I think we spent more than enough time with the adults. So I feel like if we had like a 6 hours worth of this, and we had to spend all of it with Zach Braff, I'd be like putting myself in the suicide watch for 6 weeks, because that would be some brutal watching. But yeah, I would have liked to see more time with the kids, because I think that was the biggest loss here, is we just did not get any sense of who these kids like were, or any of their like struggles or desires. And they wanted us to. It was like, oh, you want these kids to be themselves, you want these kids to like embrace what makes them themselves. And it was like, I never really understood who these characters were, you know. Like you said, oh, the one guy's kind of a comic book nerd, but like you learn that literally from the opening montage, and that's all you ever get from these characters, is like, oh, he's going to be a comic book artist. I think it could actually happen. He's going to be a player. It's probably not going to happen. She's going to be a basketball star, and that's definitely going to happen. And that's like the entirety of the development that you get for these characters is what you get in the first like 2 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
You also got the funniest line of the whole movie, when they're giving this happy montage of like, oh, and then we had this kid, our special surprise, and he's a basketball, and then they're like, and then our friends died in a drunk driving accident. I was like, whoa, what? That got a full belly laugh out of me, Joe. I was not ready for that tonal shift.
Yeah, it was like funny. Oh yeah, and our friends died in a violent car accident.
And that never comes up again, ever. There's never a moment where he like asks about his parents or anything like that. It's just like, oh yeah, then our friends died. You know, we took the kid in.
Yeah. All right.
I feel like in some world there's an episode for each of these kids. You know, there's like a 12-episode comedy series here, and it's like, oh, each kid kind of gets like their own episode, and I think that would have been a lot better. And Zach Braff and Gabriel Union are there as like supporting comedic actors rather than the leads, because they're just not interesting characters, and they're very like very unrelatable situations. And like the wife is complaining about her life, and she's sitting around the pool all day, like literally not really doing anything most of the day. Yeah. And I'm like, what are you mad about right now? Yep. And he's like, oh, I just want to sell my sauce. I'm like, all right, what a struggle, you know, real rough. Yeah. You're like, my really successful business is just, I want it to be more successful, you know. I just want more success.
Yeah. All right.
Not great.
Anything else you got to say about this?
I hope this is the low point of Disney Plus movies for the year. I really do. It would be rough if we're a lot more like this. But it was a fun review. You know, when you texted me, I was like, should I watch this? Is it terrible? And you were like, oh yeah, it's terrible. I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely watching now. Like I'm watching this one, and I'm glad I watched it in a way, because I like watching these sort of torturously bad movies once in a while. You know, every year I try and throw in a few that are just like so bad. Yep. You know, you can't watch only the good stuff. You got to have a bottom of your list too.
Yep. All right, I think that wraps up Disney Plus for the week. Don't have anything else to add. We will be back next week to talk more Disney Plus. And without further ado, goodbye.
Hey, thank you for watching the Movie Change Up podcast. We'd really appreciate if you liked, commented, subscribed, and shared us with anyone you think might be into what we're doing over here. Thank you. Have a nice day.